Raphael Lemkin, who's the lawyer who really championed genocide, it's reputed that when genocide was put in place, he howled. He said his heart had been ripped out, and it had been ripped out of the heart of the legislation because what was embedded within it was cultural genocide. You don't have to be killed to create cultural genocide, that actually by forcibly removing people from their culture, their way of being, from their land, you're actually creating an enormous disconnect. And that in itself is a cultural genocide. That was very powerful for me to hear about this. I really got that in a big way, especially after visiting. I was invited up by Indigenous leaders up in the Northern Territories in Australia, where they informed me about the intervention. I didn't even know about the intervention. This was 4 years ago, whereby it was announced by the government that there were huge levels of sex abuse playing out with Indigenous communities. And as a result, the army was sent in, and the children were separated off from the Indigenous communities, who were then forcibly taken off their land and impounded, had their right to use of money taken away from them and their rights to their own land. Now, the Race Discrimination Act, certain sections were suspended so that none of these Indigenous communities could take any action against the government. Those children were forcibly separated from their parents, and not one case was ever brought for sex abuse. So no evidence was ever brought to bear on this. Meanwhile, their land was then contracted out by the government to mining companies. So this is good old-fashioned colonialism. This is land grabs. This is really about actually wanting to get in there and take what for those communities was sacred. And as a result of that, what I drafted into the ecocide legislation was cultural ecocide. I put back in the heart that had been taken out from the genocide legislation. Now, whether or not that's put back in through genocide legislation, or whether or not it's done through the route of ecocide, it matters not. What is important is the intent behind it, to recognise that you don't actually need to have death on your hands to have significantly harmed communities, as is playing out today.